where's Thomas, who's going to put the pot smoking on his website? My counsel for you is just say you didn't inhale. Well, it's great to spend time with all of you this afternoon. I had a chance to listen to a little bit of market. It sounds like incredible information that you're consuming. So what I want to do is kind of follow up on that and talk a little bit about those big trends that you're all dealing with collectively and businesses in general are dealing with. So I'm going to start with one big trend, big data and the Internet of Things. So here's a couple of facts to think about. Every 2 days, we create more data than the beginning of time to 2003. And that's 1 trillion megabytes of data every 2 days. That's unbelievable. The second thing that helps compel that, by 2020, there'll be 4.3 connected devices per person on the planet. And that connectivity isn't simply going to be person to person, it's going to be person to machine, machine to appliance, appliance to manufacturer. So there's tons of information and data being amassed. So from a Grange response perspective, the way we're thinking about that is we recognize we needed to make significant investments in business intelligence, both internally and externally leveraging partners, thinking about talent and how you organize the data, data science, as a practice, research and development, so we can ensure that we're capable of not only meeting the demands of leveraging that data, but using it in useful ways. The second set of trends that I would mention are the speed and changing dynamics of communication. So what do I mean by that? First, we know that mobility has changed the world we live in. Talking is now texting. The responsibility we have now in terms of social is quite different than what used to be a relationship. So the relationship that used to be face-to-face is now governed in a social way where the contribution of what you put out there and what can occur can not only build a brand, but destroy it overnight. As we know, in a single twit, is that what they call that? A twit? Or tweet? Single tweet, we recognize the power and speed of communication and the impact it can have on brand and reputation. So, again, in terms of the response, we recognize the importance of your participation in social, as you heard earlier, whether you like it or not. Your customers are mingling on Facebook, leveraging LinkedIn as an example, and many other vehicles that are out there and available to you today. We try very hard to create content for you. We try to create a lot of videos, as you heard, for you to leverage that aren't Grange-centric, so you can use them to leverage and communicate and dialogue with your customers. We also have user manuals on our sales site that effectively give you the rules of engagement in a social environment. And there are. You have to understand the protocols on how best to leverage that. The third trend is population. The good old echo boom. The millennial generation taking over the economic workforce and the power to which they bring, and then behind them, Gen Z and the Alpha generation, both collectively have a different perspective, as many of you in the room do, around both diversity as well as experience and technology. Now, what's occurring across the total population is a phenomenon that we're all dealing with today. And that really changed rather dynamically in about 2007. Does anybody know what 2007 was? The monumental event? The iPhone. The creation of the iPhone has changed the dynamics of what used to be a speed of change that afforded the human capacity to stay aligned with or try to stay with adaptability of technological changes. Well, it's currently now at a point where technology is moving at such a significant clip, the ability for human capacity to stay level with that change has become very, very difficult. So what does all that mean in terms of our industry and the business that we write collectively together? And I would give you 3 things to think about. The first is the evolution of risk. The second is the service experience and expectation. And the third is disruption and accelerators. Let me explain. The first one, the evolution of risk. I stand before you truly firm in my belief that there has never been a better time to be an independent agent than there is right now. Matter of fact, it was great to hear Marcus reinforce that. Why? Because risk management, trusted counsel, and advice is at the core of what is necessary in this evolving risk environment. The sharing economy, the gig economy, connectivity, drones, all of them are creating this change in what used to be very linear risk that now creates tons of gaps in coverage and the inability to completely understand what risk you're really covering. Liability isn't as clear as it used to be. We talk a lot about autonomous vehicles, or even semi-autonomous, or anything, again, that no longer is a linear risk. Who's at fault? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the chip maker? Is it the customer who's driving the vehicle? The questions are going to continue to get more and more complex, and the need for you as agents to step in and truly understand what the exposure is for this customer will be a differentiator. So what we're doing to help you is looking at the change and the evolution in risk and trying to ensure we're giving you the products and the services to combat that. The first, rideshare coverage. So, for those of you with customers who are Uber or Lyft and you don't even know it, the reality is that we've provided you now with rideshare coverage to ensure that there's protection available for that customer and for you. The second thing we're working on is coverage for sharing of homes, Airbnb, another gap that exists today. We also launched last year cyber risk coverage for business owners. And the take-up for us, we did it very differently, was to roll it on as opposed to ask to put it on. And we're over 80% of those customers now are protected in this cyber environment that is ever evolving. The second thing that I talked about was service experience and expectation. Amazon is taking over the world. I believe that. Unfortunately, I got a package on my porch every single day I get home. That is changing the dynamics of the landscape of what customer expectation is, both in the ability to fulfill, to pay, to change. Whatever that dynamic is, it's compelling to understand that you simply can't ignore that. You have to be able to compel that experience. We, as your carrier, need to be able to support you in compelling that experience. That is going to be the demand and expectation. There's going to be winners and losers in the end. So what are we doing to help ensure that we're responding to the Amazon environment that is desperately important for us to ensure that you are part of? The first thing we did was we are one of the very few today to actually be on Amazon's Alexa. Believe it or not, whether that's powerful to you or not, you can call up Grange Insurance and ask for an agent, and it will actually talk to you and tell you. We think that's really powerful, and it separates not only us, but at the same time begins to pull the thread on Amazon as a byproduct of the experience that customers need to have as Grange and as your agency. The second thing we did was we mobilized our website. That might not seem terribly important anymore, but the reality is some still actually do use a website, so therefore if they're pulling it up on their phone, they don't have to stretch and pull it and move it in 50 directions, so we mobilized. We also launched a mobile app. Again, probably just a return on relevance, but important for you to be able to, unless you have one yourself, ensure that the customer has the capacity to self-serve whenever they demand to self-serve. So we put features out there that make it easier for them to transact whenever they want to transact. So we see that as powerful. The third thing I mentioned, accelerators and disruptors. And we hear about this all the time. There's not a conversation, there's not a meeting you go to, there's not a forum today that isn't talking about disruption and acceleration. And it's not just our business. Although I will say, many see us as prey. There's $6 billion flowing in from venture capital into our industry to try to chop our knees out. They are effectively looking at us as a legacy-based dinosaur business that is fodder for opportunity for them to disrupt. And to some degree, they're right. Now, I go back to an old Italian adage. You throw the spaghetti up against the wall and something's going to stick. I have no idea what the success rate is going to be of the startups that are compelling these rapid changes or considerations, but they're attacking the claims process, distribution, risk control, underwriting, you name it. At the core, something is going to stick. And I think what you'll continue to see is an amalgamation of either acquisitions or ideas that are opportunities for insurance companies to think about how they attach to those. So what can you do to leverage the disruption? How can you take advantage of that disruption? So let me stop and share with you, if that's not compelling enough that there's $6 billion coming after us to try to disrupt, let me give you 3 examples outside our industry of the magnitude of disruption that is occurring and can occur if you put your head in the sand and ignore. The first one, 8-year-old startup, doesn't own a single vehicle, is the largest taxi company in the world, and is now valued at $70 billion. Who's that? Uber, right. Okay, here's one that's about 10 years old. 10 years old, market value of $31 billion, doesn't own a single building with rooms for rent, and is now bigger at market value than Hilton or Marriott. Anybody know who that is? Airbnb. All right, here's the granddad of the group. 15-year-old startup. This 15-year-old startup has been working extensively at autonomous vehicle. And it is now, it's got a market capitalization of $51 billion. 15 years old. Anybody know who that is? Tesla. Okay, so let me give you another fact. That market cap now is higher than a little company you know in Detroit called Ford Motor Company. 51 billion, higher than Ford. Here's another fact. In 2016, Ford's revenue was $150 billion. Tesla's was 6. What's the market betting on? So I'll give you a quick story. This morning, I had the opportunity, my CIO just acquired a Tesla S-Series. And so, timing as it may be, he said, well, let's go out and take a drive. And he let me drive it. And I admit, I was a little freaked out because it's brand new. And I will tell you, I was even more freaked out because I have pretty old cars today, so I'm not as advanced in terms of vehicle capacity and take-up. I got a 2005 Volvo and a 2008 Mustang, for that matter. Now, when I got in this thing, it's a very unique experience. It's acceleration, it's not a combustion engine, so it's got a very quick takeoff speed, and it is amazing in terms of how fast it can go in such a short period of time. But here's what's even crazier. He says, we'll go on the highway. We go on the highway, and he says, when this thing blinks on the dashboard, you hold the wheel of the car, and then you flick down the autopilot. And then you click this other thing, and it says, move to the left lane. You take your hands off the steering wheel at 50, 60 miles an hour. It moved into the lane on its own. It freaked me out, sorry. It was crazy. And I didn't have to put my hands back on the wheel. It kept driving on its own. So that is real. And that, for me, was probably an experience that was even more compelling than when I saw the driverless vehicles by Google, because this was real, it was practical, and it's right here in Ohio. So there's so much change that's occurring. But participation is critically important. Putting your head in the sand is not an option. So what's the Grange response? Sleepless nights sometimes, a big headache, but here's what we've been doing. First, some years ago, we made very clear decisions to transform the company. That was an acknowledgement that things had to change. An 80-year-old company with lots of success, but simply put, what got us to the place we are today will not compel the future success for our kids and their kids. So, The one thing we realized was our cultural values needed to start to abridge, to think more about innovation. And therefore, we've launched an innovation incubator, which is a way of trying to dislodge a more conservative way of thinking about what we need to do to survive. The second thing we did was right here locally, we joined the FinTech 71 board, which is a accelerator and startup that allows us to get access to those smart individuals looking for ways in the financial services industry to disrupt and come up with new ways of thinking about the business. The other thing we did is there's another venture capital fund called Rev1. We're also spending money with them, and they're more unique because they think totally out of the box. It's not about financial services, to look again for ways to think about ideas that we can potentially consume in the company to think differently about the way forward that will allow us to ensure that we are a company that's not just a certain survivor, but a thriving survivor. We demand to be relevant, and we're working our tails off to ensure that not only us, but you are part of that journey. So, exciting times, challenging times, opportunistic times. And it reminds me of a quote that I keep on my desk. Every day I read it to remind myself. And it's from a president in the 1960s, John F. Kennedy. And it says, "Change is the law of life. And those who only look to the past or the present are bound to miss the future." So I compel you as well to keep your minds open and recognize change is necessary to evolve and survive. Thank you very much for all you do for this industry and for the time today. Appreciate it.